Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the Great Nepali Diaspora, and I'm Preeti Adhikari. TGND is a community of global Nepali professionals, and through our programs, we want to showcase Nepali experts that are doing some amazing work around the world. त्यसैले we're so excited to have this panel. You'll get to know more about them really soon. Just before we begin, some housekeeping rules. Please make sure you're on mute. If you're not talking, especially, make sure that it's always on mute. And then, as we start the conversation, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and we'll go through them in the after we're done with some moderated questions. Within TGND, within the Great Nepali Diaspora, we have a few hubs, and this is through the PhD hub. We want to showcase, that you can have a PhD degree and use it for so many different domains. There's so much that can be done. In terms of career conversations, I think we'll put it for another time, but you will definitely learn so much from our experts today. So without further ado, I'll pass it to our moderator for today, Dr. Prajwal Pandey.
Well, thank you, Preeti Didi. Can everybody hear me? Yes, okay. Well, first of all, warm welcome to everybody, and thank you for those joining in from Nepal. It's pretty late, I think 9 almost. My name is Prajwal Pandey, and I'm an associate professor of environmental science at a business college here in Massachusetts. And I'm honored to welcome you all to this panel featuring Nepali experts working in the area of global climate change issues, broadly speaking. And also, there is no question, as you all know, that we are in the middle of a climate crisis and a climate emergency right now, right? I mean, this past summer, 2023 was the hottest July, on record, and we are definitely on track to be the warmest year in recorded history, this 2023. The recent report also came out a few days ago about planetary boundaries. I'm not sure how many of you have looked at that, but it also said that we're also pushing different boundaries, outside our limits that the planet can hold, outside of climate change. So I think all of these are pointing to definitely a crisis, right? And as a result, we are seeing extreme weather climate events. I think this summer, and every summer that we feel, there's always these events, increasingly happening, and they're no longer rare, right? So, for example, the raging fires in Quebec that blanketed the whole northeastern U.S. this past summer with smoke, for weeks. The fires that brought Hawaii to ruins, Lahaina this past summer. The flooding in Libya, right, last week, that has cost, we have lost about 20,000 lives. And another flooding that has happened in Southeast Asia this past summer, including one, Amri Mustang in Kagbeni. We had a massive flooding this past summer. So we're seeing these increasing patterns of extreme events. So in the next hour or so, hopefully we can, with our panelists and experts, we can get their insights and knowledge into a broad range of topics on climate change. And of course, these will be very critical, to our communities, either in Nepal or beyond, right? All these issues. And while doing so, I think the point is also to highlight some of the amazing work that is being done by the Nepali diaspora, particularly in this issue of global climate change. So yeah, it is indeed a privilege to guide this discussion, and thank you, Preeti Didi, for giving us a spotlight. And without further ado, I do want to let the experts and panelists introduce themselves, and I'll start with Dr. Pasang Yangji Sherpa.
Hi everyone. Good morning, Tashile. I'm trained as an anthropologist. I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia, and my official title, the job description, is to work on the program on lifeways in Indigenous Asia. So what that means is I'm jointly appointed between Asian Studies and Critical Indigenous Studies here. But like I said, most of my training was in anthropology. Actually, all of my training has been in anthropology, but I use anthropological insights to ask questions of climate change, and I work very closely with geographers. Most recently, I've been thinking about plural climate frameworks for the Himalayan region, and also contributed to the latest IPCC assessment report, including the special report on oceanic and cryospheric change, thinking about high mountain regions. So as you can guess, many of you might already know, my primary field site is the high mountain region in the Nepali Himalayas. And as an anthropologist, I work very closely with the Sherpa community from Nepal and the diaspora in North America. So I'll keep it at that.
Yes, we have Dr. Surendra Adhikari now.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So first of all, I'd like to thank Prasola and Priti for this opportunity. And thank everyone for your time, for being here, for your time and interest. I appreciate it. And, I feel it's a great pleasure and privilege for me to be part of this incredible panel. I must respect to Pasangji, my co-panelist. So yeah, my name is Surendra Adhikari. I am a research scientist at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So I've been working here for almost a decade now. So in general, my research focuses on the intersection between climate science and solid earth geophysics. So basically, I study the large-scale climate phenomenon, including the melting of the polar ice sheets like Greenland and Antarctica, and also global glaciers melting, including those in our own backyard in the Himalayas, and the associated sea level rise, right? I mean, as the glacier melts, the water must go somewhere. And after all, we live in a closed system. So the water mostly or eventually goes to the ocean, and hence causing the oceans to rise. And as you could probably know, that more than 50% of the population, the global population, is located within a couple of meters above mean sea level. So literally in a very low-lying flat land. And you can imagine what might happen if sea level rises by a meter or multimeter, which is what we expect to happen in the next couple of centuries, let's say. So I'm mostly interested in those kind of problem, but also me being a geophysicist, I am also intrigued by understanding and investigating some of the intriguing geophysical problems in connection to climate change. For example, how climate change might impact Earth's gravitation and Earth's rotation, and if there would be any like two-way feedback mechanism between climate system and the interior of the Earth, in particular, the interaction between core and mantle. So things like that. But for this panel, I like to put my climate scientist hat, and I'll try and do my best to give my perspective on climate change and climate crisis. So I'll start with that. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for the introductions. And so let's get a little bit personal. Our first question. What I would like to, both of you, maybe I'll start with Dr. Surendra, is could both of you each describe your journey, to this point that has led to where you are today. We've all taken different paths and different ways, and whether you planned it or not. And I think it'd be great to share with the audience, how you got here, how did you end up here, what has been your, maybe struggles. I'm sure there's been struggles amidst, a lot of successes as well. And also finally, what inspired you to be in this, field, in the field of particularly climate change or global climate change in general, right? So let's start with Dr. Surendra.
Yeah, absolutely. So since you mentioned, if we plan to be where we are at now when we were back in Nepal, answer is definitely no, right? I was born and raised in a small village in Lamjung, and there was no way I could dream to work for NASA and to do this global scale problem. So no, so things happened step by step, and I'm sure it will happen for all of us, hopefully in a good way. So yeah, I was born and raised in a small village in Lamjung. My dad was a high school teacher, and we were just studying in the same school. So we went to the public local school where my dad used to teach. And fast forward, I completed my Bachelor's of Engineering from TUIOE. I think it was in 2004/5, because at the time the country was going through a turmoil because of Maoist insurgency. I'm sure everybody, at least, even though you did not feel how it was like, but you must have at least heard about it if you are too young. So the thing is that, even for us, the 4-year program engineering, it would take easily 5 or 6 years to accomplish, just because of so many mess that was going around. So that's why I say like 2004/5. So anyway, so at the time it was virtually impossible to land a relatively decent relevant job to work in Nepal, which I tried and didn't happen. But fortunately, I got a scholarship to study a master's degree in Belgium for 2 years. So I did my master's in engineering geology from Free University of Brussels in Belgium. And it was about that time I realized that I enjoy more geology, geophysics than engineering. And then I tried to shape up my career accordingly. So I applied for graduate school for PhD in geophysics, and I got a scholarship to do PhD in glaciology, basically from the University of at the University of Calgary, Canada. And so in my PhD, I studied, the mechanics of ice flow, how ice flows, coming from engineering background with a lot of pride on applied mechanics and things like that. So I wanted to apply that for understanding how ice flows, across scales, meaning from small scale glaciers like those that we have in the Himalayas to the large scale ice sheets like the ones that we have in Greenland and Antarctica. But the overarching goal was that how do glaciers and ice sheets evolve in the ongoing climate change scenarios? So that was basically what I was focusing on in my PhD. And so I feel like, in hindsight, I'm one of the very rare, luckiest ones, who has always gotten, opportunities, one opportunity after another. And happily, I have taken those opportunities with both hands and made most out of it. So after PhD, I got a scholarship a fellowship to do NASA postdoctoral program in Caltech and JPL for 2 years. And this is when literally, as you know, NASA is all about, space exploration, not only in the outer space, but also, going to the space and looking back to our own home planet, through all kind of satellite missions that we have. And it, in a way, opened my eyes, from being a highly focused, researcher focusing on the mechanics of particular things, and how to put that in a broader context of, Earth and space sciences. So it has definitely changed the whole, my view about science and how the research should be conducted. So presently, I combine all kind of satellite remote sensing data and develop the physical models, and I try and merge the two. So we have a well-conditioned model for the improved projection of glacier changes, ice sheet changes, sea level changes, and Earth's gravitational rotational changes and things like that. So yeah, speaking of struggle, and obviously all of us who have landed, outside of our home country, we must have failed all kind of barriers, cultural, language, and so on. And it's not unique to me. I'm sure it's true for everybody. So there's nothing unique about it in my case. But apart from that, I feel like I have been in a way, good company that has led me to succeed in a way. So there's no particular hurdle apart from, as I said, the classical, hurdles that we all of us have faced. In my case, I have not faced that much. So yeah, I don't know what else to say, Prajal. Let me know if you want me.
That's very good. Yeah, thank you. Let's move on to Dr. Pasang. If you could give us your, brief path to here, that'd be great.
I'll just go between back and forth in English and Nepali. I think most of the people who are in audience today, my journey might sound familiar. मेरो चाहिँ एकदमै टिपिकल के +2 काठमाडौँमा सघाएर अनि त्यसपछि चाहिँ I was born and raised in Kathmandu. But when I think about home, for me, it's Khumbu and Farak, which is Everest region in Nepal. And so we still have all of our relatives there and our ancestral like home. And so that's where I feel most connected, in addition to Kathmandu, obviously, where I was born and raised up. अनि त्यो एकदम टिपिकल +2 सकायो ब्याचलर्सको लागि युएसमा पढ्नको लागि आएको सो आई grew up in 90s Kathmandu, and then after 2000 के अरे यता युएसमा आइडाहोमा सानो कलेजमा चाहिँ Lewis Clark State College, which is relatively small, liberal arts college. Ani State College. I did my bachelor's there, and then I went to Washington State University for my master's and PhD in anthropology. My bachelor's in social science. And just a side note, so when I started to apply for universities in the US, that was around 2003-04. Ani मेरो interest aeronautical engineering मा जाने थियो. And then I was advised by one of the institutes, Jansan ekdam typical hamro Putali Sarakko institute ma. So that's the route I took. And they advised me to not apply for aeronautical engineering. Post 9/11, that might not be a good idea. And I thought it was okay. And then I ended up doing social science for my bachelor's and anthropology for my master's PhD. Went and taught at Penn State University as a lecturer for a couple of years. And then I went to New School University, a New School, Parsons, in New York, worked there as a postdoc fellow. And that was where I actually faced really a difficult time. And I actually had to quit that job because of just the toxic workplace environment, and a lot of abuse that I had to endure there. So, मेरो postdoc-को 1 महिनाको contract I still had 1 month left, but I had to take myself out of that situation. For 5 years, I actually did not have a full-time job because I was still recovering physically and mentally from all of the just challenges, frustrations that come with being in an academic institution, junior professional, fresh out of PhD. So it's in contrast to Surendraji's, how you describe, everything's, I think I had the other side of that experience, and it was actually very, very difficult. And I'm saying all of this is because I was ready to quit academia when this particular job opened up, and I applied for it. And now I'm very happy because I have a very supportive faculty, colleagues. I have very supportive departments and peers where I can see my research growing and expanding, and I feel good about it. But this is also not to share a very a happy ending situation, because I think to have a situation like mine, like the at least present ending one, like mine, it's a very rare thing. Academic position itself is such a becoming more and more rare and more difficult to get. So academic positions, say this is what I want to do in the future. I actually don't recommend even my PhD students to think about it. I actually encourage them to develop different skills that are translatable across industries. I think that's how we need to be thinking about just recognizing how academic institutions are functioning these days and or are not functioning these days. So this is like a very general overview, but what inspired me to work in this field, anthropology, I was always interested in the cultural side. And that was actually my, and I think this is a good segue into the next question that Rajulji might bring up. So all I wanted to do when I was in Nepal was मेरो हजुरआमाको life story र मेरो आमाको life story र मेरो life story compare गर्ने. That was all I wanted to do. But when I was working on my PhD, that's when I realized, okay, no, this climate change thing is serious. It's real. This was also time, this is before 2009. So this was also time when a lot of NGOs, a lot of media attention was focused on the disaster that is going to happen because of climate change. Most of these disaster scenarios were around the glacial lake outburst flood. So what I realized back then was, okay, if something has, if there is a glacial lake outburst flood, my mom's village is gone. Most of the villages in Kumbu and Farak are going to be damaged. So what does this really mean? And what do we need to do? How do we need to prepare ourselves, our communities on it? So that's how I got into the climate change question. So it was more out of necessity, and also feeling the need to understand what and how do we live with climate change. So I'll end there.
Thank you both. Yes, I'm sure academia is very challenging to those who are starting either their PhDs or are in Nepal. I mean, as Dr. Sherpa said, I definitely agree that it's not as easy as it sounds here, especially in the United States. I'm sure we could have another panel on that. Thank you. I mean, for persevering, and especially being a minority women and making it to academia. That's a feat in itself too, because it's definitely dominated by male, particularly. So in our previous we had a brief meeting, and we decided that student earlier. I think if anybody wants to be in touch with all of us regarding academical career questions, I think we can always email and contact us directly. And I already saying about, while we have all these experts here, we've thought maybe it's best to focus on their expertise and what they are doing. So I think we'll talk about that in the next half an hour, 40 minutes. So coming back to this question again, coming back to Dr. Pasang again, from your perspective, anthropological, there's certainly a heavy emphasis on the physical science when it comes to climate science, IPCC, all of that. So how do you, from your discipline or from your, I think you briefly talked about it a little bit, but how do you address or define let's say climate change, especially in the case of Nepal, right? From your own discipline perspective and from your research.
So for this, the thing that comes to mind again and again is how are Nepalis experiencing climate change right now? I think that's the question I want to start with for myself in my work. And so I just follow even my experience in Kathmandu this summer. We all know this spring, त्यो काठमाडौँको air pollution यस्तो खतरा भएर त्यो world record भयो हैन. So there's that, and I'm laughing about it, but when you're actually in that space, especially with children and older folks or people with like severe health conditions, it's not a laughing matter. It's quite a serious matter. And then with that, there's this just change in the weather patterns. अब पानीको अघि हामीले पानीको कुरा पनि गर्यो हैन, just the flooding, the rain flooding that was happening in Kathmandu, Kagbiniमा, त्यस्तो like the destruction that happened, and what we saw in Mustang this year is not something that happened only this year, right? So we saw this happening last year. We saw like something similar happening previously at a maybe different scale. So the way I think about it is, okay, so scientifically we can measure the rate of flooding or the volume of the flood water. That's one good and one important piece of information. But from the person who's losing their house, from the perspective of the person who's losing their fields, and I know I was in communication with somebody last year, and she was sharing how, like, right in front of her eyes, she could see all the trees being flooded away, washed away. So these are like a lot of traumatic experiences that people are experiencing, in addition to economic hardship and all of this and that. So, okay, so coming back to your question, how do we define climate change problem for Nepal? I think for Nepal, how are Nepalis experiencing and observing and adapting to climate change? I think that's what we need to be focusing on. That's how I see it. What that means is really understanding the local conditions. So, हुम्लामा चाहिँ एउटा गाउँमा चाहिँ अब सबै गाउँलेहरू चाहिँ सडक निर्माणमा लागि परेका छन् किन भन्दाखेरि अब आफ्नो बालीनालीहरू राम्रो छैन, so you don't know what's going to survive and what they're going to be able to feed their children. So what they have to do is go and work for like a daily wage of 100 rupees or 1,000 rupees or whatever the rate is, to make sure that they can provide food for their family. So these are the kinds of realities people are dealing with, right? And so हामीले climate change को कुरा गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ okay, how do we balance? I mean, climate change is a tricky reality, that and complex reality for us, where we have to have that scientific knowledge, and then we also have to have the knowledge of how people are experiencing on the ground, and how do we, with all of the available knowledge, try to make sense of what is most useful, what is the best, or how do we support, or how do we even ask for support? I think these are different questions that bring up for me. And to define climate change problem for Nepal, I go back to Nepalis and their experiences. And Nepalis, it's a plural term. Like Nepali experience is not one uniform experience. Kathmanduko Nepalile experience गर्ने, Mustangkole experience गर्ने, Humlakole experience गर्ने, Solukhumbukoले experience गर्ने. These are all different experiences. So how do we make sense of that? So that's how I think.
Thank you, Dr. Patsang. Yeah, we'll probably circle back to several points you raised. I think very important. Storytelling, I think, is what I was thinking of when you were talking about some of the stories and experiences. Let me switch to Dr. Surendra now. Obviously, I'm a climate scientist or a physical earth scientist myself. So, hamro chai kaam, I think, is more understanding processes, right? As you're talking about earlier, across spatial, geospatial, and spatial and temporal scales. And I know that you're working with a very global perspective, trying to understand some of these large scale, earth processes. We obviously know a lot more than we did, 10 years ago or even 20 years ago about how the, planet will, what these processes are. And I think these are important because we want to find out how the planet will respond, to this relentless warming in the next decade or the coming years. So I think it's more like a overview. Can you give us an overview of where are we right now with respect, to our understanding of climate or global climate science? Right now, are there anything? Sometimes when you're talking about these big processes, Antarctica, Greenland, I have this problem all the time in teaching. Kids and students, they have hard time relating these problems that are far and distant and never have to bother about these distant places. So where are we today with this? Our understanding. Are there unknowns that we are really? Are we at the edge of or tipping points of some of these? Big scale changes. What does that mean for Nepal too? We'll obviously want to come back to Nepal too. Whether it's changes in our monsoon or whatever it may be. And we're already seeing changes that are these broad scale potential things that we don't know or that might be unfolding. Like how does that potentially be important to us too? In our Himalayan, right? So it's a very broad question, but
yeah. So I don't know how to frame. I don't know how to frame the answer, but let me try my best. So for me, I study Earth as a physical system, right? Being a physical scientist. So, and it's a closed system, which is not entirely true, because the very idea of global warming is dependent on the notion that there is energy imbalance, within the system, meaning the solar radiation comes in through the atmosphere, and part of it gets trapped because partly due to the greenhouse gases. So it's not in an energy balanced state. So energy is actually increasing day by day, and hence we are experiencing warmer temperature, and all the cascading consequences that we have already touched upon, including ice melting, the glacial lake outburst flooding that Mas Pasang mentioned, and consequences to downstream flooding and livelihood. So it's a nested and really the cascading thing. But again, zooming back and going back to the global scale phenomenon. So the fundamental to the climate change is that, how in the end of the day, how the mass and energy is being transported from one place to another. And if you think of the transport of energy, so you can easily think of atmosphere, which is so dynamic, right? So basically the very idea that wind flows is because there is a potential gradient, right? So where you have high potential or high pressure region, and then there must be low pressure region somewhere, and because of this gradient in pressure, then wind finds or defines its own direction and it flows. So, and in doing so, it is transporting heat or energy. So this is a simple example of how energy and is being transported. So if you think of ocean, so you can easily say a similar thing. And, we have been hearing some news like, the potential collapse of the Gulf Stream and, things like that, the big conveyor belts that have been transporting water mass and energy from one part of the ocean to the other part of the ocean. And as Prajwal touched upon, monsoon system is essentially a subsystem of the global climate system, right? So, yeah, and it's going to have consequences for Nepal because monsoon, South Asian monsoon, is the lifeline for us in Nepal because it dictates how much precipitation we are going to get and when we are going to get, and what that means for our, basically survival, right? I mean, if there is no water, no life, as you know that. So, yeah, I'm still thinking in the backdrop of my mind. And again, my answer could be really discreet, and I apologize for that. So going back to the question that your students ask you about, why should we care if something happens in Antarctica, right? And this is even so true for Nepalese people, including me. I was so very struggling in my, I say, for many years to connect the dot, being from Nepal, why do I need to bother studying Antarctic ice sheet? And why not just focus on glaciers in the Himalayas, for example? And the answer to the question is that, after all, we live in a closed system, as I said in the beginning, right? And the very nature, the physical nature of a closed system is that if you poke the system in one part of the system, then its consequences are inevitable elsewhere. And it could be direct, it could be indirect, right? And if we just think from, a very superficial perspective, we don't necessarily be able to connect the dots. But if you dig deeper and think deeper, then, after all, everything's connected. And at the point, it might sound like a bit philosophical, but I guess this is how it is. So, I mean, finding a connection for Nepalese application, for example, related to melting of ice in Antarctica. So I'd simply say, as you mentioned, the melting of ice from Antarctica would mean that, the ice, the water, the melt water has to go somewhere, which is ocean, and meaning the ocean is rising on top of the tremendous amount of energy that ocean is absorbing. So basically, we'll have more water and warm water, and which is the perfect ingredient for the large-scale storm sources and large-scale hurricanes. And also, it might intensify the existing, the climate system, such as South Asian monsoon system. And then, if having more intense monsoon might be difficult to cope for Nepalese people, because that would mean, in a literal sense, more flooding, more landslides. And how do we handle that? We don't have any infrastructure to route the flooding or to retain, basically to regulate the flood. And glaciers are obviously, I should not miss that, because I did my my entry to geophysics, basically glacier AX010. Maybe it's not too far from Pasang's hometown in Khumbu. It's in the Khumbu region, tiny glacier. At the time I wanted to predict, or basically project, what might happen for a particular glacier. And when I was doing my research for master's thesis, we did not have much data from space at the time, and we had to do all kind of assumptions about how deep the ice might be, and then develop some model and apply plausible climate change scenarios, and then say how glacier might evolve. And maybe I should share this paper to Pasang, even though it might be just focus on one glacier. It is very dear to me. But anyway, so, and the glacier, just think about it, right? I mean, if we don't have glaciers in the Himalayas, basically we don't have, the fresh water, which is kind of a backup, right? In a way, and it buffers the water retention. Basically, it enhances the nation's water retention capacity, right? Meaning, if you just have pure rainwater falling on the high mountain, it just flows down, and after a couple of months, when monsoon is over, there would be no water. Maybe some groundwater, but not so much. But glacier is, in a way, हाम्रो गाउँमा भकारीमा धान राख्ने भने जस्तो के, in a way, it's storing water, and for some other time in the year when there is not much natural rainfall occurring, especially in the pre-monsoon season, right after summer, and then snow starts melting, and hence delivering water, and which is the lifeline of the whole not only for life but also the ecosystem and everything in the country. So there is obviously a connection that you could make for every point on Earth to what might happen in every other point in Earth. It's just a matter of, if the magnitude of change happening in one part of the planet is big enough to impact the other part of the planet. But apparently, it turns out it is going to be a big thing for virtually everywhere on the planet due to climate change related ice melting and sea level rise.
Thank you, Dr. Sundar. Also, I mean, to add on to this glaciers, there's this idea of peak water, right? At some point, the glaciers. I think there was a recent ICIMOD high-wise report that came out, maybe a couple of months ago. I think June. They're saying 80% loss potentially by 2100. It seems far away, but it's not too far, geologically speaking, that we might reduce the once the glaciers are lost, as Dr. Surendra was saying. Now coming back to Dr. Pasang, let's talk a little bit about solutions. We obviously there's this physical science part, and then the Earth system that we know a lot about. And taking the example Everest, or maybe these glacial floods again. I think we've seen in the past there money has been spent to either engineer some of the solutions. How do you approach solutions? I know we talked about that, we have to include the people there, how they observe and adapt to these climate change. Let's take the issue of Nepal, for example. Is there a disconnect between some of these things that we know and some of the things that perhaps the solution are coming from top down, when the people's, I went to the Everest season maybe once only, but I know that it is an overly, over-researched area. I think I got the sense some people are almost fed up because they're trying to come and study the same thing over and over again. And is even climate change the top of their issue, right? And how do they approach solutions going forward? So yeah, it's a mixed question, but I'm trying to see is if we really want to, if this is a problem and if we are looking for solutions, what's the best way, to include the people on the ground and approach that, right?
So before I directly answer your question, I just want to add a couple of things to what I was saying earlier after listening to Prajwalji and Surendraji, right? So what I said earlier was that we need to look at how Nepalis are experiencing and observing climate change, right? And then I think the reality today is that to understand what Nepalis are experiencing and observing, we cannot just focus on the local scale. We have to absolutely go at the regional scale, national scale, and planetary scale. And this is where I think Surendraji's knowledge and the contribution is so important, because what you just mentioned, which makes so much sense, and is a really good way of kind of illustrating the challenge, right? It's a system, and we are all living in a system. And so if we're just focusing on the ecological side, we know that, what happens in one part of the planet is going to have a direct impact on another part of the planet. And it's just that impact is just going to intensify and be stronger. So that's one thing, and I think that kind of system thinking is helpful, and also cross skill thinking is important when we're thinking about climate change and how Nepalis are experiencing it. So to go on the other side, to look at another dimension, so thinking about policy, for example, and adaptation programs and policies. Coming back to your question, Prajwalji. So about adaptation program or policy ko case ma pani त्यही हो. We have to look at the local scale, but we also have to recognize the implication of the policies and programs that are being developed at the national scale, regional scale, Hindu Kush Himalaya scale ma, or the global scale, which is like at the planetary scale, right? And so how Nepalis are experiencing and what Nepalis are experiencing is impacted by so many things that are happening at different scales. So that's one thought I had. But in terms of solution, I actually don't use the word solution, because I think there is no solution to climate change. But what there is I think about it in a different perspective. I focus on the living part and the life part. So this is not to say that everyone should get rid of solution from their vocabulary, but I'm just saying there's maybe we can look at the problem from a different perspective and get a different answer. So when looking at the living and the life part, so in Khumbu, for example, the most immediate and most important issue of high concern is tourism industry. And that is the case because every single household's income is tied to how well the tourism industry does. This is not to say that they're not concerned about the effects of climate change. They are absolutely concerned about the effects of climate change, but how they're experiencing and how they're concerned is different from how we might in academic, scientific, or policymaking world, or who are living outside Khumbu. The way we think about climate change and the concerns might not necessarily match exactly how local people are thinking about these challenges. So to give you an example, you see everything, all of the indicators of climate change and all of the indicators of like the effects of climate change you can see. So for example, the vegetation like going higher and higher in elevation, arrival of different kinds of insects, just the temperature, what you feel on your body, to like the extreme events that destroys all of the crops one year, and then the other year, like, so one year there's drought, another year there's flood. And so these kinds of things you notice, and people are thinking about this, but they are thinking it through the lens of the tourism industry. And that is something we have to pay attention to, I think, when we're thinking about climate change adaptation program at the local scales. What are the other things that are also happening that directly affect the lives of people there? So Luklama katiwata flight ayo, like every villager will know. On katiwata helicopter aएर कतिवटा टुरिस्ट चाहिँ माथिबाट नै लिएर गयो लुक्लामा नआइकन. So we all know. And so when we're so concerned and only narrowly focused on glaciers, which is the case in the at least in Khumbu, when it comes to climate change, we're only focusing on melting of glaciers and Himalayan glaciers, which is an important thing to know about, to study. But that's not the only climate change effect the local people are experiencing. And so if we're really concerned about how local people will adapt, be resilient to, and really, if we're really interested in expanding our knowledge about the climate change impact at the local scale, we cannot be selecting one effect and focusing and narrowing all of our energy into that, right? We have to understand, okay, what's happening to the insects? Why are we seeing more and more mosquitoes in this place where it's not supposed to be? So these are the kinds of questions, and I think for me, solution on that, so how do we live with climate change is something that I come back to again and again.
Yeah, Asangji, if I just want to add another sort of sub question, your climate dialogue, in whether it's proposed solution going forward, your indigenous voice, so include गर्नुपर्छ भनेर we keep hearing and hearing, because obviously indigenous people, whether they're in Nepal or elsewhere, they are the first to bear the effects of climate change, to witness, and they also feel the impacts of climate change the most, right? Like we still keep hearing this notion, but I think there's still a lot of criticism that we're not able to do that in the global climate dialogue, whether it's local or in case of Nepal too, right? How can we make sure that that this is done properly going forward, even if we say with Nepal first, right? How do we ensure this? Because I feel like we come back to this point time and time again, and I think there's still a lot to be done in this aspect.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Prajolji. So our common colleague, Dr. Ritodi Chakravarti, he and we've been thinking about this question for quite some time. He focuses on the Indian Himalayas. So what we've been discussing a lot is the plurality, right? And so what we mean by that is, okay, so how do we think about multiple knowledge systems, and how do we recognize that every knowledge system by default has advantages and disadvantages and capacities and limitations. So that's just the nature of a knowledge system, right? And so that's why we keep on working on those knowledge systems to make it better. So what that means then is, in our case, okay, how do we first of all recognize there is indigenous knowledge, and there is what we might consider more commonly scientific knowledge. Hamro kesma चाहिँ, not just in Nepal, this is, I think, something that we see everywhere, and this is why the IPCC level analysis is so important, where we have to really recognize that, first of all, कस्तो हुन्छ नि, अब हाम्रो चाहिँ गोकी लेकलाई एकदम पूजा गर्ने चलन छ नि त, अनि when we think about the prayers and the worshipping of the Gokyo Lake, I think when we bring that into the domain of climate change, to easily dismiss गर्ने tendency हुन्छ के, but how and why is that meaningful? And what is that prayer doing? What is that technology of prayer doing? What is that technology of worshipping doing to maintain the balance, the ecosystem balance of that area? भन्ने खालको त्यस्तो खालको पर्सपेक्टिभबाट हामीले हेरेकै छैन के, because we are so quick to dismiss, this is all superstition, यो चाहिँ काम लाग्दैन भनेर हामीले dismiss गर्ने चलन छ. तर त्यही superstition or त्यस्तै खालको traditional thinking, traditional relationship between human or non-human कोले गरेर त we have had that balancing of the ecosystem for so many generations, not just Sherpa and Khumbu, but like throughout Nepal. Like that's something we see throughout Nepal, but we are so quick to dismiss and infantilize our traditional ways of relating to the environment, our traditional ways of worshipping environment, and recognizing and acknowledging the agency of the mountains, the rivers, the trees, right? त्योलाई चाहिँ हामीले क्लाइमेट चेन्जको कन्भर्सेसन आउने बित्तिकै चाहिँ यो दिस इज जस्ट टु डिस्ट्र्याक्टिङ, दिस इज नट युजफुल भन्ने तरिकाले लिन्छौँ। तर what we're doing at that, when we do that, what is happening, the cost is that we are losing all of the values that we could gain from paying more attention to and like just paying more attention to and practicing and continuing that kind of traditional practice. So I think so. With climate change, how do we get to a point where we recognize that there is not one way of thinking about what's happening to the environment? And I think this question is becoming and will be more and more important for all of us to consider, because when we're thinking about climate change, there's one thing we can do, the prediction, right? Which the scientific community has done. They have the best instruments, best tools to help us predict what's happening and what will happen, and also tell us what has happened. But how do we live with that? And I think this is where the adaptation part comes in. Like, how do we live? Okay, glacier melting, okay, we know that. And this is climate change is a problem. Okay, we know that. So what? So how do we live with it? So what do I tell my daughter? So how do I educate my parents? So how do I, do I even imagine a future for my grandkids? Like, can I even imagine a future with my grandkids being able to walk outside Kathmandu freely without wearing masks? So these are the kinds of questions that I think we still, we're going to be faced with more and more in the coming days. And so how do we get to that point is the kind of work I do.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think we'll probably go for another maybe 5-7 minutes, of questions, and then I think the idea is to take audience questions which are coming through. So we want to make sure we spend some time doing that too. But I have a question for Surendraji. I think I think globally, from a climate sort of crisis perspective, I mean the ultimate solution is obviously to bring down the emissions, right? To at least bring down this warming that you were saying. And at least with the Paris Climate Agreement, I think the target was 1.5 by mid-century, but I think we're already kind of beyond that right now. How do you? I mean, it is hard to see when we're playing with climate scenarios. We're just dealing with numbers, and the solutions are all on the ground. I guess how. I guess from a perspective, from a climate perspective too, how do these solutions, take place? And for a country like Nepal, we are one of the lowest emitters of carbon dioxide, like 0.005% of the global emissions. But I'm sure we are one of the most vulnerable when it comes to climate impacts. So how should a country like Nepal, let's say if you're planning our adaptation mitigation, should we plan on mitigation, reducing our emissions, or should we plan? It sounds like we should be maybe planning more on adaptation too, right? Making sure, because we're already feeling the impacts.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a very broad in terms of solutions, the role of the US and then the Western world versus where we are in the developing world as well, right?
Yeah, I think so. This is the ultimate question, right? I mean, so what do you do about it, right? Because climate change is happening. What do you do about it? And I think Pasangji has brought up very very the practical aspects of the problem, right? Like the pollution and how it has impacted people in a real life situation. So that's the ultimate sort of goal, to make the betterment of our life in the future in light of climate change. So just to, I think for me, there is a subtle difference between climate change and climate crisis, even though we tend to think as they are the same thing. Because climate change, again, for me, is a purely physical phenomenon, right? Climate change is happening. It is happening. We know why it is happening, mostly because of fossil fuel burning. And we know what's the solution. In an ideal world, we want to stop, extracting fossil fuel and burning it, period, right? So that's the climate change, if you want the real solution. But even then, right, we stop the emitting CO2 from now, today, but the consequence of climate change, which is climate crisis. The climate crisis is related to the consequences of climate change. So we'll have to deal with climate crisis in many decades to come, or maybe even centuries, even though we stop burning fossil fuel now. Because after all, we live in a closed system, as I said. It's a physical system with a lot of non-linearities, and it takes time to kick in some process like Antarctic ice sheet to generate significant amount of water to raise sea level and change the very pattern of climate system, such as South Asian monsoon. So we know that. So now I don't want to talk too much about climate change from Nepalese perspective, partly because as you said, Prajwal, we are not one of the bigger polluters, right? In fact, we have not polluted the system, the planet. So what we can do though is we can do lobbying in an international platform like IPCC or whatever global platform that we can raise our voice as a nation, maybe UN, another platform, that just stating the fact that even though we have not polluted the system, we are the ones who is one of the main victims of this whole climate thing. And so that might mean we are lobbying for the oil producer and emitters to not do that anymore. But also what we can ask for more money, because it's like a compensation, right? I mean, if you are being hurt or harmed by somebody else, it's better for them to realize that we are a victim for doing no harm. And so for that, we need some sort of compensation. And this is where we get, I think Prajwal mentioned, like there's a UN program on something along this line. I forgot the name, but
the UN has established something called the Loss and Damage Fund.
Exactly.
Based on the last COP meeting, I think the developing countries are asking for $100 billion to be allocated. Whether US and I think countries like US are pushing back. Nobody wants to give that money to this fund, but yeah, I think that does segue to this question, of climate finance. Obviously, we have, we need the money whether to transition to just some sort of energy or anything. I think developing countries need that money, whether it's adaptation or both mitigation. I think I read the national adaptation plan for Nepal, and it said by 2030 we need about $21 billion based on the report. For almost $50 billion by mid-century for all climate mitigation adaptation plan. That's based on our national plan. But I guess my question, maybe I'll come back to Dr. Pasang again.
Yeah, maybe Prajwal,
sorry.
I'm not completely done because I just touched upon. I'll finish in a couple of minutes. So I touched upon climate change thing, right? So this is climate change issue. The solution, stopping the emission, and Nepal, a country like Nepal, we cannot do anything, but we can do lobbying, and we can ask for this loss and damage fund being materialized. And so say we get the compensation, right? This is compensation essentially. Then what do you do? So now going back to Pasang's remark that, in the end of the day, climate change is happening. Even if we stop the burning fossil fuel now, its consequences are going to be felt in many decades, even centuries to come. And then that means that we as a human being have to live with the consequences of climate change, aka climate crisis, right? We have to live through the climate crisis. And then for a country like Nepal, we need to invest a lot on adaptation and mitigation. So living along with the climate crisis is essentially adaptation, which is, I don't want to spend too much time on that because this is precisely what Dr. Sherpa touched upon. And mitigation is something like, I could think of a quick analogy here. So let's say we have a intense, or let's say the intensity, duration, and timing of South Asian monsoon has shifted or changed in an unpredictable way, let's say. So this is a consequence of climate change, right? And then, so what do you do for mitigation and adaptation? So I could think of, one of the obvious consequences of the variability in monsoon system is landslide and flooding, just as an example. And the mitigation could be that we need to identify the locations or the hill slope that are more prone to landslide in this example. And we might want to do, bioengineering thing or, tree plantation and blah, blah, right? So this is mitigation. And adaptation is that we have to identify some settlements if they are located close to the places that are prone for landslide and flooding. We'll have to move them to a relatively safer place. So this is more like adaptation. So yeah, again, for a country like Nepal, there's very little we can do for solving the climate change issue, but solving the climate crisis issue, which is again not really the solution, but mostly adaptation and mitigation, then we can do a lot in terms of our future planning and policy making. And of course, to materialize those plans, whatever plans we come up with, we need funding, and part of the funding could come from the loss and damage fund kind of things, which essentially will be channelized from the polluters like US, China, and many other developed nations. So yeah, that's my quick perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Sundra. Before I move on to the question, while we're on this topic of adaptation, mitigation, one last question to Dr. Sherpa, and then I'll move on to the audience Q&A. Do you think, Dr. Sherpa, can we climate finance our way through this mess for a country like Nepal? I'm always skeptical. I think we had a green climate fund, not too long ago, and that never materialized either. And we have all these, I think, needs for funding based on the adaptation plan and everything. These are the needs of our country to meet these things. But how do you feel about, when it comes to, things that unfold in the ground in terms of whatever measures take place? Do you think this finance projects and funding, would they succeed, do you think, down the road? Or, are you skeptical as well, like perhaps me?
I agree with everything Surendraji just said. And on top of that, I think climate finance चाहिँ ब्यान्डेड जस्तो हो क्या घाउ चाहिँ त्यो निको हुँदैन क्या त्यो कस्तो हो भने पहिला त्यो when I was doing my dissertation field work around like 2010 2011 त्यतिखेर चाहिँ यो नापा र लापा डकुमेन्टहरु भर्खर आइरहेको थियो नि अनि त्यतिखेर I think the number was 380 million if I'm not mistaken. So I was thinking, like when I was developing my research proposal and then doing my field work, and after when I was processing my data, I was thinking, okay, imagine गरौँ न $380 million US dollars नेपालमा आयो रे. So त्यो पैसा आएपछि हाम्रो सबै क्लाइमेटको प्रब्लम क्लाइमेट चेन्जबाट आएको प्रब्लमहरु सबै सल्भ हुन्छ त भनेर like it's not gonna happen, right? It's just not gonna happen. But what it will do is it will relieve people from some of their problems. So that is for sure. But it's not going to it's not going to resolve the crisis that we're going to live for. And as Surendraji said, not only years, but not only decades, but we're talking about centuries. Consequence so I think the finance part should be seen as banded. That's going to give you some relief, but really the bigger question is how do we live with that consequence, right? Long-term consequence, like generations live feel on consequence. So that is that. Yeah, and I think the most important thing, and I think Prajolji, you were trying to get me to say this, or based on what I've published, is like I think the most important thing at the end, and this also connects to relates to some of the questions I'm seeing in the Q&A. हाम्रो चाहिँ यो climate change adaptation program policy भन्ने बित्तिकै चाहिँ कस्तो हुन्छ भने we have experts and their expertise. तर लोकल कन्डिसनमा कस्तो खालको अब कहाँनिर पुल बनाउनु पर्छ अब पुल बनायो भने के रे एउटा ल्यान्डस्लाइडको इस्यु सल्भ हुन्छ भनेर हामीलाई थाहा त छ तर कहाँ बनाउनु पर्छ कसरी बनाउनु पर्छ कुन महिनामा गएर बनाउनु पर्छ कस्तो मटेरियलको बनाउनु पर्छ भने त काठमाडौँ बस्ने त्यो कहिले गाउँ नपुगेको एक्सपर्ट अथवा गाउँ पुगेको भए पनि त्यो टुरिस्टको रूपमा पुगेको एक्सपर्टलाई कसरी थाहा हुन्छ त्यो गाउँमा बसेर कुन बाटोबाट जाँदाखेरि घाँस काट्नको लागि कुन बाटो राम्रो छ अथवा टुरिस्ट आउँदाखेरि कुन बाटोबाट मान्छे हिँड्नु मिल्छ कुन बाटोबाट चाहिँ खच्चर हिँड्नु मिल्छ भनेर त्यस्तो ज्ञान भएको लोकल एक्सपर्टहरूसँग काम गरेर चाहिँ फर्स्टमा चाहिँ अब लाइक डु यु इभन निड support? I think that's where we should start. And what kind of support do you need? अब हाम्रोमा चाहिँ यो कस्तो भएको छ भने when we think about climate change or so important topic, we need very important experts with PhDs, you know, and who can speak in English fluently and who can speak the language of global climate change experts. So that's how we're trained and how we have internalized what the experts, who the experts are and what expertise is. So how do we untrain ourselves to recognize that for any local, any condition, any like local environment, the experts are the people who are living in that environment? And how do we, alikati humility ka sath, how do we take the knowledge we have gained, the knowledge and expertise we have without diminishing our own knowledge and expertise from academic institutions or aru ठाउँको चाहिँ, how do we take that knowledge and work with communities to do the kinds of things that the community needs? Instead of saying, this is who I am, this is what I know you need, and this is what you will do. And here's the money. And if you don't do what I do, I'll take the money away. That's bound to fail. And we have seen over and over and over and over, like anyone who goes to Nepal, and especially in Khumbu, where there are so many, like, you know, everyone who wants to come and save the Sherpas and in the Everest region, right? We see that over and over. So on top of this, like connecting it with the PhD and climate change and knowledge aspect here, like we can do a simple Google search, Everest climate change. You'll see so many articles, so much knowledge being produced. But from a Sherpa perspective, from a community perspective, what's the point of that knowledge if that doesn't make any sense for them? And every single article that gets produced means one article, the article एउटा publish गर्नलाई कति dollars चाहिँ spend भयो होला क्या, हुन्छ कति time, कति energy invest भयो होला हैन. So like I think Surendra ji described my perspective quite eloquently. So I think about all of these questions in a very practical sense, and from a very practical way, because again, like I said earlier, at the end of the day, it's all about like, how do I walk outside of my door and get to breathe fresh air, and how can I actually imagine a future for my grandchildren? At this stage, like with how things are and where we're going, I don't know. If I assuming that none of us do anything, I don't know what kind of future I can even imagine. But I will end with this point that I actually do have a lot of hope. And my hope is not that climate change will be solved, but my hope is that we have enough people and we have expanding communities across the world who are really thinking about these questions in practical ways, in meaningful ways, and really coordinating their expertise and knowledge with each other to make this world a livable planet, like make this planet livable. And that's why, like, I want to thank the organizers of the event today, Preeti ji and Prajwal ji, and also like thank Surendra ji for like such a big contribution through your knowledge and expertise. And so all of this actually gives me hope, even though this conversation has been mostly about like what has gone wrong. I think the fact that we're talking about this and we have an audience, a very attentive audience, is an indication that we are actually moving in the right direction. And that actually gives me hope.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. I think we at this point, I certainly want to move to some of the questions in the audience too. I see a few here. I'm scanning through it. Maybe I'll pose one to Surendra here.
Maybe Prajwal, why don't you ask them to ask the question there?
Yeah, maybe we have a audience here. So Ajit Khanal, maybe do you want to ask the question of climate crisis and climate change? Unmute yourself, and maybe why don't you pose the question yourself to Dr. Surendra?
Hi, thank you for this organizing this event. I think it has been a really fruitful one. So my question to Dr. Surendra is like, so he touched on the idea that there is a subtle difference between climate crisis and climate change, and there is a fraction of people who think that climate change is happening, but we are not in a stage of climate crisis. So what are your thoughts on that? Are we in a stage where our models are predicting that climate crisis is bound to happen in, let's say, a decade or centuries to come, and we have to deal with the climate change so that we don't end up in that crisis? So my question is that. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ajit, for a nice question. So, I don't believe in odds. I believe in the things that are happening in real life, right? I mean, so you can label it climate crisis, climate emergency, or whatever, but I'm sure you also agree with me that, climate change is happening, and also climate crisis, whatever it means, is also happening as we speak, because as Prajwal mentioned in his intro, kind of in his introduction, that he gave a handful of example of how we being the civilian of the planet have been witnessing all kind of crises related to, or the consequences related to, climate change. So we may call it climate crisis, climate emergency, it doesn't really matter, but we have been feeling the consequences of climate change in real life, and this is precisely what Dr. Sherpa is also really attached with, in terms of dealing the consequences of climate change in our day-to-day life. So speaking of future, the climate crisis, let's say the consequences that we are facing, we call it climate crisis. But what I like to say is that in the future, the intensity of this climate crisis is only going to increase. So it's coming, big time. And I don't want to scare all of us, because this is the reality, right? I mean, so one analogy I try to give my students is that, if, say, I'm diagnosed with a cancer and the doctor told me you have a cancer, then the thing is that I have two options, right? Either I say, well, I don't trust you because I don't feel anything. I barely feel mild symptom of cancer, which is probably what we have been feeling now, which is the milder part of climate crisis. But eventually, 2 years, 5 years down the line, if I don't listen to the doctor, and if I don't follow their treatment plans, then I will bound to doom, right? So I think the climate change is also like that. So we are, in that analytical sense, I'd say we have started experiencing all kind of symptoms, and we know the climate, we have the cancer. So the thing is that how best we want to move forward to deal with this particular disease. And so again, in the future, the things might be even messier. And it doesn't matter if you call it climate crisis or climate emergency, but the thing is that we are experiencing the consequences of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call on someone else. If you unmute and ask, could you also tell the audience, what are you doing at the moment, wherever you are? That'd be great, like a really quick introduction. I'm going to call on Priyanka Mahat from Providence, Rhode Island. If you want to unmute and ask the question to Dr. Sherpa, I think that'd be great.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Priyanka. I'm a senior at Brown University, and I'm also studying climate science and development studies, and grappling a lot with the kinds of questions that you talked about today, where you look at climate negotiations, Firma, how much of the focus is on scientific and economic ways of thinking about addressing loss and damage, and kind of, looking at the world and the crisis through this lens, versus how a lot of the impacts, there's no language of translation, right, between cultures, between knowledge systems, as you talked about. And so working in the sphere and throughout your career trajectory, you said that you also worked in the IPCC report earlier. So what kind of has it looked like to be from kind of representing marginalized perspectives or representing the anthropological, the social scientists' perspectives in this sphere, and how can we do a better job at being more holistic around how we talk about the climate crisis at these international policy levels.
Okay, I think there are two parts to this question. One is easy to answer, one is a little difficult. The first part I think is much easier. I can just talk about the experience. So far it's been typical, which is social sciences are not seen as important enough, or a field of study that could be useful or that could meaningfully contribute. And this when I say this, all we need to do is look at the past IPCC reports. So the latest IPCC is the 6th assessment report. If you look at the past 5 reports, it's only the 5th assessment report when we start to see incorporation of more social science perspectives, right? And when I say social science, I'm thinking about anthropologists, and so now and also incorporation of indigenous knowledge. And the 5th assessment report, a lot of scientists, a lot of people were talking about how social scientists should be included, how indigenous knowledge should be included. And then in the 6th report, what we are seeing, which my colleagues and I, we just finished analyzing it. And so we're in the process of concluding and writing our findings. But so there's this aspiration to include indigenous knowledge, but it's aspirational. It's not, we haven't reached a point from an IPCC perspective where we can holistically, meaningfully incorporate various forms of knowledges to think through the climate change problem. And so I also mentioned that I was a contributing author to the last IPCC report, but what that actually looks like is not much of a participation, and not enough participation to say that, okay, I actually made a meaningful contribution to that. So what I've discovered now in retrospect, after talking to other colleagues, is that everyone has different levels of experience of participation. So some were and so we get invited to participate, right? And so some were invited to participate a lot more than others. In my case, I think, and I want to be very respectful of the people who invited me into the process, but at the same time being very truthful about and honest about my experience. It was very, very minimal, and I did not feel like I actually was able to contribute. However, the fact that my name is included is symbolically, I think, meaningful to represent inclusivity. Which for me is like a performance, right? It's performance. And I will end with one example. And so you think like it's just the physical science versus the social science? No. So the challenge is really, I think, deeply rooted in how we think about who experts are and expertise is, really. So in 2019, I was invited to be a part of like a discussion on an international panel discussing climate change in the Himalayas from a social science perspective. And by this time, I had already worked like around close to 10 years on climate change matters from an anthropological perspective. But, so this happened, this conference happened, the panels happened, and I was invited as the discussant. But as soon as I started to speak, I was not allowed to even complete my sentence. And it was very interesting. I didn't know what was happening in the beginning, and it continued to happen like throughout the 2 sessions. And this was a room full of like all of the junior, senior, everyone, all of the experts, so-called experts, junior, senior from the field, and they were basically witnessing right in front of their eyes me, like the organizers shutting me down. Later I realized that other people were also uncomfortable about what happened because they came and talked to me outside. But really, when I was thinking about myself in that room, I realized that I was the only person of color from the region in the room. And it was a room full of white folks, senior, senior scholars from off the region who were beginning to think about climate change issues. But the fact that there was a brown woman, a baku, and I was wearing my traditional baku. And so a baku Nepali kiti, त्यो पनि young देख्ने आएर यहाँ climate change को कुरा गर्न थाल्यो, she must not know what she's talking about. When in fact, if I am frank about it, like I might be one of the very few people in that room who had been thinking about this question for a very long time from the community perspective. So even in that space, there's this different layers of challenges that we face. There's that gender aspect, but the racialized aspect is also something that has to be recognized. The disciplinary biases gender-based biases race nationality-based biases. So I think this is just like now I just keep my eyes wide open and then be frank about it and just move on, because for me the main issue is really to think about the climate change problem and the consequences, like how we've discussed today. So I just try to keep my eyes and focus on that and recognize all of this and let other people deal with how they want to perceive me or how they want to perceive a particular discipline over another. And I just focus on the important work that needs to happen.
Thank you. I think we have two more questions. I think the last person might have left. Lakpa Sherpa, if you want to unmute and ask the question. I think it's a question on land use change, and maybe Dr. Surendra Adhikari can answer. Lakpa Sherpa, do you want to ask the question yourself?
Thank you, Rajapal. I think my question is solely focused on some of the key initiatives that we could take. Obviously, I don't live in the remote region of Nepal, but I was curious to see if bamboo plantation, one of the initiatives that we could take as an afforestation process that can also easily capture carbon and grow within a period of 2 or 3 years compared to trees that take years to grow.
Yeah, I think this is this is a very good point, and there are many people who have investigated, how to capture carbon dioxide or the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So we can do, whatever little things we can do to minimize the impact of climate change. So some people have practiced, not to travel, so often, so they minimize their carbon footprint. And afforestation is obviously, one of the many things that could help to, in a way, slightly minimize the impact of, maybe local level, the impact of the climate change. But I think the real solution is that, we live in such a big planet and we have such a thick atmosphere, and we have been emitting so much CO2, and capturing CO2 out of this vast atmosphere is, in my opinion, virtually impossible. So, but I'm not saying we should not be doing, plantation. That will definitely help for many reasons, if not only for capturing CO2. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely something we should be doing. But we should not only, put our faith on, the plantation, so hoping that it solves the whole problem. So it's not gonna do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lakpa Sherpa, for the question. I think land use change, I do want to mention, I think it does doesn't get as much maybe publicity on the climate issue, but certainly has its role, I think, on the bigger climate picture, obviously. One more question.
Sorry, can I quickly jump
sure. Yes,
1 second? But I think what we need to pay attention to, and this is based on case studies from so many different places, right? So I think the era easy solution, we think about introducing certain plants, but I think that introduction of new crop or new plant to an ecosystem and what that does to the local ecosystem, I think those are the important questions that also need to be undertaken, because we know already there are so many places around the world, new crops and new plants and new solar panels, like different things have been introduced to ecosystems. And we think these are green solutions, but not necessarily, but they're not necessarily environmentally friendly. So I think we have to be very careful about what we are doing, and we cannot, and even the monocrop, right? And monocrop is like cropping is another thing, like just introducing one item and planting and like overplanting to achieve a certain goal, I think is not should not be taken for granted. I think it should be thought of critically and thought about whether it's something that's useful for given the local ecosystem and the conditions of the place where we want to take it. I think these are the questions we need to be asking before introducing certain things. And this is why I think working with community is so important, because communities usually know which plant will work and which plant will actually cause landslide, right? And so.
Yeah, that's thank you, Dr. Pasang. I think we didn't really touch on this a little bit on maladaptation, because there's a huge literature on, our implementation of solutions without understanding what the vulnerability context is across landscapes can potentially maladapt as well, right? So I think Arman Bajacharya, if you want to ask the question to Dr. Sherpa, I think I have a specific question. Please unmute and please introduce yourself as well.
Also, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a fourth year PhD student at Clark. So my question is for Dr. Sherpa, and this is based on what you said about like the local priorities are different from what we think unless we go to the field. And the example you brought up was tourism and about the planes coming into Lukla or not and all that stuff. So clearly there's connections to external markets from rural communities, mountain communities to Kathmandu, and then abroad as well. And it has a lot of advantages when you think about how money is flowing, how employment is happening. But do you think this requires like equitable climate change adaptation strategies? When you think about some agricultural communities are now more focused towards cash crops and not sustenance-based cropping. And also like the market is all based on external, it is externalized. So is there a way considering this as well when we're talking about adaptation strategies? And of course, this can be local knowledge system based thing that we've already talked about in terms of like यो बाटो importance of यता कता के बनाउने भनेर. But is this kind of a perspective that's something that's come up in your research or something that comes up in the literature as well?
If I understood your question correctly, so it's like the consideration of external factors outside Khumbu and its impact on Khumbu in terms of adaptation strategies. Is that right?
Right, especially advantage or disadvantage.
Yeah. I think this is where, first of all, it does come up in my research again and again. And when I think, so climate change ko bareमा सोच्दाखेरि चाहिँ अब we have to think about the different climate change effects, what's happening year after year to cash crops, for example, or what's happening to the unpredictability of weather patterns, which is causing delays in the arrival of tourists or this and that, or availability of food even. So these are so there are multiple layers to consider. one of the because of extreme events, one of the things I do look at is disaster preparedness and what happens post-disaster. And so one of the findings that really changed my perspective on how to deal with climate change work was post-earthquake recovery and recovery. So त्यतिखेर चाहिँ के भएको थियो भने like most of the recovery and relief effort support actually came from outside Nepal. And they came from communities like family members living outside Khumbu. So the reality अहिले खुम्बुमा चाहिँ कस्तो छ भने a lot of like significant number of families have at least one member outside living in the US or another country. What that means is they're able to, the families living in Khumbu are able to pull on resources from the diaspora to support their relief efforts on the ground. So why is this relevant to the climate change conversation we're having right now? So the connection is, okay, let's say an extreme event, climate change related extreme event happens, any disaster strike, so what can the community do? So is the community going to rely on the government that has been that may be able to support, but the support will be little and there will be delay in when the support is going to come? Or they're going to rely on their immediate family members who are going to help them with the relief efforts, right? And so from a community perspective, they have to calculate all of the calculate and navigate the sources of support where they're going to get. So this being said, the diaspora climate change, so now I also have to consider the diaspora and the channels of support that can flow through those connections. And so in that sense, yes, in my research, I have been looking at external factors like that, migration related, but more than that, also the fact that the scales of our problems have increased so much. So what I mean by that is, so when I was growing up, you would not see helicopters flying frequently. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll see one helicopter and all the kids in the village will go after it to see what it looks like, right? Because it's so exciting. Now, during tourist season, if you go to Khumbu, we recorded, we were there in April and we recorded one day where like every 5 minutes there was a helicopter flying. What that means, okay, so why is that happening? For the fact that there are so many rich people in Nepal who can afford to have helicopter companies and promoting helicopters, and there are so many rich people who can actually come and fly. You know, like there are different kinds of problems that we also have to deal with. So we don't actually have to wait for the climate-related crisis to happen to feel the consequences of the moment that we're living in. There are so many different things that are happening that may not necessarily look like climate change, environmental disaster, but there are a lot of things that are happening that are climate change crisis in the making. And so that's why I think like when we're thinking about these questions, we really have to be looking at multiple levels and multiple layers and across scales and unpacking the complexity. So that's what I'll say, but this is a very big question. I think it requires a lot of like unpacking.
Thank you. I think we're probably gonna take one last question given the time here. Biraj Dungana, if you want to unmute and introduce and ask away the question, please. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Biraj Dungana. I'm a polymer plastic research, and I wanted to contribute to prevent the open burning of plastics in the mountain regions of Nepal, as it has a very bad consequences. I'm basically into a materials engineering, so I'm not very much aware about how much is the extent of impact it is having in the climate change. but I think I'm sure it has a bad effect, and I wanted to know like what is the scenario and what is its effect over there. That is my one question. And another question is that recently right now I'm in UK. I met one during a conference last week. I met one documentary maker who was interested to make a documentary related to the plastic burning in the mountains and its effects. So if anyone is interested to join, please feel free to connect with me, and together we can make something that could be eye-opening for that scenario. So that is what I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Biraz. Surendra, do you want to take that question? Burning.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not an expert on the burning plastic and how it might impact climate, but yeah, based on my own experience, अब गाउँमा हुँदा प्लास्टिकको सफल burn गर्दाखेरि you just the smell that you get out of it is just toxic, right? I mean, it's not a good thing for sure. I read somewhere that plastic is one of those very few inventions that humankind have ever made, which is so very useful, but so very, how to say, the negative side, so very I am struggling finding it. So very environmentally, let's say, environmentally unfriendly in a way, because it doesn't decay so easily, right? And then you must have seen documentaries about plastic bottles being collected from Mount Everest, from the the deeper part of the Pacific Ocean. So, and also I have read some articles about how in the most remote part of the planet, even there is traces of the human-made plastics. So it is toxic, definitely, and it has definitely impacted not only climate, but the environment and ecosystem in general, I'd say. But I cannot give you a quantitative answer on this. But yeah, and the idea about the documentary sounds interesting. And yeah, I wish you good luck, and it's gonna help many people, be educated. And if you need some, help in terms of putting things in climatic context or whatever, feel free to reach out to me. But yeah, so I wish you all the best on this very important endeavor. Looks like. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Biraz, for the question. I think that's all we have today for, there's a couple of other questions, but people have left. I think those was the question. For those who are here, I think you can always feel free to reach out to any of us with additional questions. Email, I think you can easily find if you search the names online. But yeah, thank you everybody for taking part on Sunday.
Oh, sorry. Sorry to keep disrupting you, Prasol, but can I just say a few words on that plastic comment?
Sure, definitely.
Okay. So first of all, Birazji, I think you might be the expert in terms of like knowing what happens to plastic and why plastic and the scientific side of things. But I will say in the mountain regions, I think the question is, I think the question that should be posed is not necessarily, why are these mountain communities burning plastic, and like look at the, this. And how this is such a big mistake that the mountain communities are making. I think त्यो question like rephrase गर्नु पर्छ जस्तो लाग्छ. So I think in the first place, like how are the plastic getting there? I think is a big question that we need to be talking about. Like, अब सुरेन्द्रजीले भन्नुभएको चाहिँ उहाँले प्लास्टिकको चप्पलको कुरा गर्नुभयो. हाम्रोमा प्लास्टिकको ऱ्यापरहरू हुन्छ. अब यो हाम्रो चाहिँ कस्तो हुन्छ भने खुम्बु क्षेत्रमा चाहिँ यो सगरमाथा पोल्युसन कन्ट्रोल कमिटी भन्ने संस्थाले चाहिँ ट्र्याक गरिरहेछ. And that's the only organization, local community based organization जसले चाहिँ त्यहाँको वेस्ट म्यानेज गर्छ. तर अहिले चाहिँ कस्तो छ भने खुम्बु क्षेत्रमा चाहिँ फोहोर बढेको छ, फोहोर हुन्छ या वा भनेर चाहिँ मिडियामा चाहिँ धेरै देखिन्छ. तर कसरी चाहिँ त्यहाँको संस्थालाई चाहिँ सपोर्ट गरेर त्यो वेस्ट म्यानेजमेन्ट गर्नको लागि चाहिँ कसरी हामीले सपोर्ट गर्ने भन्ने खालको कन्भर्सेसन चाहिँ निस्किँदैन. एन्ड दिस इज भेरी इम्पोर्टेन्ट टु ब्रिङ अप बिकज लाइक के अरे एभ्री टुरिस्ट सिजनमा चाहिँ त्यो वेस्ट एकदमै राइज हुन्छ कि. अनि त्यहाँको त्यो संस्थाले चाहिँ they're always struggling to figure out how to manage that waste. I think we're not really paying attention to like how the plastic is even getting there in the first place, and how we who take the plastic to these regions are not managing our waste properly, and therefore sometimes result के हुन्छ भने the communities are like out of the alternative now, they have no other way to take care of the waste other than burning. And so how and why are the communities in that situation in the first place? I think these are important questions to bring up. I'll just shout out to like my upcoming events if anyone is interested. So there is a woman, Angdolma Sherpa, who you might know. She is working on, she's actually producing one of the most successful biodegradable prayer flags. So mountain regionsमा जाँदाखेरि चाहिँ अहिले धेरै खाताहरूको प्रयोग हुन्छ हैन, यो खाताहरू चाहिँ they're all synthetic material, and so the only way and the culturally appropriate way to get rid of it is to burn, which means it creates a lot of like toxic elements into the environment, which you know Biraji better than us. I think so there's we're featuring her work sometime in the spring at UBC, and we're also featuring the work of Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee. And I'll share these events information with Preeti ji, and so hopefully we can circulate with the Great Nepali Diaspora community. So with that, sorry for taking more time.
No, thank you. Preeti ji, I think that's it from the panel. Do you want to add anything last? And we can
no, this was amazing. Mata, I've been really busy taking a lot of notes. And I think, I speak for the diaspora, saying that one of the big reasons I wanted to, have a panel of experts is sometimes you hear all these terms that unless you're sort of in that industry, you don't know, one, right? And two, I think Nepali context, at least I don't hear a lot of conversation around it, ongoing conversation, right? It just happens during UN week or something like that. Having those conversations is amazing, right? So on our end, I would love frequent conversation with our communities in terms of what can be done and everything. That we originally planned for 1 hour. I think it's almost 2 hours. So thank you to our amazing panelists. Thank you, Prajwal. And thank you for our audience. I think the questions, the insightful questions people put in, people are really invested in it and so on. So hopefully we can, keep having these conversations and actually turn some of that into action as well. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.